Chapter 8, Process Costing. So remember last chapter we talked about job costing, and job costing is when you're doing jobs which are unique jobs, such as accounting services, where you're going to provide a different service for every customer that you have. But when we're talking about process costing, we are producing something that is homogeneous, something that is not different. Each item is going to be pretty much the same as the next item. So here's a graphical comparison, representation of what I just mentioned. When you're doing job costing, each job is considered unique, and so you can trace the materials, labor, and factory overhead directly to each job. And then finally, once the jobs are complete, then they get put into finished goods, and then at the end they are reclassified as cost of goods sold. However, when we're talking about process costing, that's assuming that all units are homogeneous, and so you're not going to differentiate it between jobs, but you're going to put goods through process A, then through process B, then through process C. Some types of processes only have two different processes. Some have more than two. It's not just A, B, and C all the time. But the concept is that the goods that you're creating go through these processes together, and they're not separated into different jobs. One concept that we need to talk about is the concept of equivalent units. So this is when you are manufacturing a certain product, and the manufacturing takes more than a day. It takes several days or maybe a few weeks. So one unit of product is not always complete at the end of the month. So, for example, let's say you have 1 gallon of water, or let's say paint. You have 1 gallon of paint that's complete, right? And then you have another gallon that's only half complete, 50% complete, and you have another gallon that's 50% complete. All right, so this is the concept. When you're manufacturing goods, you look at the percentage completion, and then you add them up. Okay, so in this case, if you have 1 gallon of water, 1 gallon of paint, that's going to be the same thing as if you had two 50% gallons that were full. Okay, so it's a pretty simple concept. You add up all of the partial units that you have, and then you calculate what you would have in equivalent units, equivalent whole units. And this is what we're going to do in the chapter. We're going to deal with units that might be 50% complete, might be 30%, whatever it is. We're going to have to pay attention. The problem is going to tell us exactly how far along each unit is. You can also find the average percent complete by adding up these three portions and dividing by 3. In this case, in this example, there are 3 cans of paint. One is 30% complete, one is 75% complete, or full would be a better word, and one is 90% complete. So you add those 3 up, divided by the 3 cans of paint, and it tells you that If you're going to make them all even, you could have each can of paint would be only 65% complete. All right, so it looks like we'd have to take out a little bit from this can, take out a little bit from this can, and then add it to this can. And if we do that, then each can will be 65% complete. Now for the homework, we're not going to have to do this. The homework's just going to give us a percent of, let's say, work in process. It'll say that work in process is 30% complete, 50%, whatever it might be. Now it might tell you it's 50% complete as in terms of materials, but only 10% complete in terms of labor. So that's something we'll have to differentiate. But in this, but we're not going to have to do this where we add up the different units, the different cans of paint, and then divide by that amount. We're not going to cover that in our homework. In Chapter 6, we apply costs to products that have been transferred out of work in process and units that remained in work in process in the inventory. And in this chapter, we're going to do the same thing. So the approach that we follow is going to be in these 5 steps. We're going to measure the flow, the physical flow of resources, compute the equivalent units of production, identify the product costs that we need to account for, compute the costs per equivalent unit, and finally assign product cost to batches of work. So the example given to us in the PowerPoint and in the book is Torrance Tape Company. So this company manufactures adhesives and tapes in 3 different processes or steps. There's the compounding department, the coating department, and the cutting and packaging department. So these are the 3 processes that we're going to add costs to. All right. So here's something tricky with these processes. You have to pay attention to when materials and labor are added to the process. So what does that mean? Well, think about it when you're cooking or baking something at home. So for example, let's say you're making a soup, right? The soup, the recipe will tell you to put, it might tell you to put the meat at the very beginning when you first start cooking the soup because it takes the longest to cook. Then if you're adding a vegetable like potatoes or carrots, it might say put it halfway through your total cook time. Or if you're adding something like spinach, it's going to tell you put it at the very end. So, depending on what the material is, you're going to add it at different times of the cook. And these process costing problems are the same way. All right, so the book, so in this case, the book tells us that in the compounding department, all materials are added at the beginning of the process. Right, the book could tell you it's added at the end of the process, 25% of the way through the process, etc. It can tell you different stages of the process when the materials are added. So you have to pay attention to what it tells you. And in this case, it's telling us that in the compounding department, all materials are added at the very, very beginning. So keep that in mind as we progress through this example, as well as work on the homework problems. So for step number 1, remember, we are going to measure the physical flow of resources. So we have here, it says we have 112,000 total gallons to account for. It tells us that 20,000 gallons were in beginning inventory at March 1st, and 92,000 gallons that were started during March. Again, try to keep it straight in your head. When it's talking about 112,000 gallons of paint here, or whatever it is, it's not 112,000 complete gallons. All right, so you're going to have 112,000 paint cans, maybe, but you don't know exactly at this point, without reading reading the rest of the worksheet. You don't know exactly how much of these 112,000 cans were full. You know, they could be 100% full, they could be 90% full, 80, 50, whatever it might be. So we don't know that at this point. So let's keep looking down this worksheet. So the second part of the worksheet, it says that 96,000 gallons were transferred out. All right, so when you see that something is transferred out, that means that you know that it's 100% complete. Okay, whatever the compounding department is supposed to do to this product, it's 100% done. All right, now it's on to the next department, which in this case is the coating department. All right, so since 96,000 gallons were transferred out, then we assume that that this 96,000, they're gonna first complete this 20,000. Okay, so we had 20,000. Remember, in beginning work in process inventory. So out of this 96,000, you know that 20,000 of that was from the beginning inventory. So then that means that out of this 92,000 here, that's where we get the other 76. Okay, so let me write this out again because it can get a little bit confusing. So we had 96,000 gallons completed. Okay, 20 of that is from the beginning inventory. So that means that the other 76,000 is from the gallons that were started in March. Okay, so we have to pay attention to where these gallons came from. So out of the 96 again, 20,000 came from beginning inventory, and then the other 76,000 came from this 92,000 starting batch in March. All right. Now this also tells us, let's see, that there's 16,000 left in work in process, and that they are 30% complete. And the way we tell that, it gives it to us. See, it says 30% in the fact pattern. So so these 16,000 gallons are only 30% complete. So on this slide, again, we look at transferred out materials or units, 96,000. And remember, when it's transferred out, it's 100% complete for labor and materials. All right, so that's why the equivalent units for materials is 96,000, and the equivalent units for conversion costs, if you recall, conversion costs are labor and overhead. It's complete as well. Remember, it's transferred out, so that means it's complete as of materials, labor, and overhead. Now let's look at work in process. March 31st, we have 16,000 paint cans, 16,000 units. Well, actually, it's not paint cans. I think it's cans of adhesive, I think. 16,000. Now, when we look at columns D and E, it says that for materials, the equivalent units is 16,000 as well. And for conversion costs, it's only 4,800. Now, why is that? So, why is materials 16,000, but conversion is 4,800. Remember what we said in the beginning? We said that in terms of materials, materials are put in at the very, very beginning of the process. So the moment you put a unit into the compounding department, that very second you add in 100% of the materials. So that means that materials is always going to be 100% complete when you're talking about the compounding department. Now for conversion costs, it looks like labor is added throughout the procedure. So in this case, it's telling us that it's 30%. So if you do 4,800 divided by 16,000, you're going to get 30%. Right? So the 4,800 comes from there, and then the 16,000 total comes from there. And the book also gives us the cost information for March for both the work in process and current costs. Now these amounts are given to us. It's not something that we calculated. We are going to use these amounts in our calculations, but they are originally given to us. So there's two different methods that we're going to talk about to identify the product costs for which to account for. We're going to deal with the weighted average unit cost and FIFO. So weighted average, you're going to add your work in process cost with your current period cost, and then divide it by your equivalent units in work in process plus the current period equivalent units. We're going to focus mainly on weighted average, and that's what we're going to do in the homework as well. But there is going to be a little bit of FIFO. Okay, so whenever we do the FIFO part of the homework, just pay attention that you're doing the right method. You're not doing weighted average. You're doing FIFO. Okay. When we're using FIFO, we're going to separate out the two. We're going to separate work in process costs in EU versus current period costs in EU, which is equivalent units. So first, we're going to talk about how to assign costs using the weighted average method. All right. Again, we're going to do both methods. We're going to do FIFO as well, but we're going to concentrate mainly on weighted average costing. So again, going back to step one of the when we're using weighted average, we're going to measure the physical flow of the resources. So we have 112,000 total gallons to account for. And remember, again, these aren't full 100% gallons. These are 112,000 gallons that are filled up at least partially. All right. We started out with 20,000 partial gallons, and then we added 92,000 more partial gallons. So we have 112,000 gallons to account for. Now it tells us at the end of the month that we ended up transferring out 96,000 gallons. So we know that out of this 112, 96,000 was complete. So then that means that if we do 112 minus 96, we get 16. So we know that 16,000 units were not complete. And but how complete were they? They were 30% complete with respect to conversion costs. So if you add up our 96,100 units that were 100% complete, add that to the 16,000 partial units, you get 112,000 units to account for. So for step two, we are computing the equivalent units of production. Right? It says 96,000 units were transferred out. But remember, whenever we are doing weighted average, we don't care where those 96,000 units came from. All right. Remember the prior slide we were looking at? I think it was 20,000 that came from beginning inventory, and then the other 92 or whatever it was started during the month. Well, when we're doing weighted average, we don't care where those 96,000 units came from. We don't care if they were started last month and they were in beginning inventory, or if they were started during March. Right? They just don't. It just doesn't matter when you're using the weighted average method. So we'll combine our units and our costs for a weighted average. We do know that if 96,000 units were transferred out, remember when something is transferred out, that means that it's 100% complete. Okay. If they were not complete, they would still be in the inventory. All right. So for the 16,000 units that are still in the inventory, you know that they're not complete. Now you do realize though that they are 100% complete in respect to materials. Remember we talked about it in the compounding department. They put in the materials all at the very beginning. So the units are 100% complete with respect to materials, but they're only 30% complete with respect to conversion costs. All right, so we have total equivalent units. If we're talking about materials, our equivalent units are 112,000. But if we're talking about in terms of conversion, then our equivalent units is only 100,800. So for step 3, we're identifying costs that we need to account for. So in this case, a total beginning inventory cost is going to be 24,286, and 16,000 of that came from materials, and the other 8,000 is coming from conversion costs. Now, during the month of March, 84,640 of material costs were incurred, and 213,000 conversion costs were also incurred. So that adds about 298,274. All right, and then total cost that we need to account for is going to be 322. The 322 includes both the amounts from work in process and current costs. All right, so we're going to account for this 322. We see that 100 of that is allocated for materials, and 222,000 is allocated for conversion costs. So now we have our number of equivalent units in terms of materials as well as in terms of conversion costs. We also have our costs to account for. So now we're going to compute the costs per equivalent unit. All right, so total materials of 100,800. You're going to divide that by 112,000 equivalent units of material, and you're going to get 90 cents. The conversion cost, 221,760. You're going to divide that by equivalent 100,800 units, and you're going to get conversion cost of $2.20. In step 5, we're going to assign the product costs to batches of work. Again, there was 96,000 units transferred out times let's see. So we have the 96,000 units transferred out times the 220 per equivalent unit, and we get 211,200 cost conversion transferred out. And then we also have 96,000 units times the 90 cents for materials, and that gives us 86,400. There are also 16,000 equivalent units for materials times the 90 cents per unit, and that gives us 14,400 materials cost in your ending work in process. And then there are 4,800 equivalent units for conversion costs. So remember, it's only 30%. And then we're going to multiply that by 220 to give us the 10,560 conversion cost in ending work in process inventory. So all in all, where are the $322,560 of costs to account for at March 31st? 297 are assigned to the units transferred out of the adhesive department, and then 24,960 are assigned to the units in ending inventory. So the total costs are accounted for are $322,560.